Good afternoon. I'd like to welcome everyone to this week's edition of Imperial as One's Belonging series, where we explore the lived experiences of individuals from Black, Asian, and minority communities. People who are willing to share their experiences, because you know what? When we start finding out about other people, we find out more about ourselves. So, as I say this every week, and this week I think is another treat. We've got Professor Giles Yeo, and he is the professor of, he's coming in soon, he's the professor of molecular neuroendocrinology at the MRC Metabolic Diseases Unit, and he's also scientific director of the Genomics and Transcriptomics core at Cambridge University. So Giles, it's a real pleasure to have you with us this afternoon.
Thank you for having me, Wayne.
And I'm going to just say, as I say most weeks, I'm going to kick off with the first question, which is, can you tell us a little bit about what it is, what it was that provided you with that sense of identity, sense of belonging as you were growing up?
I mean, you warned me you were going to ask this question. I think it's a complex answer because I had a complex, we kind of moved around, and so I have got a number of different identities that sort of evolved as I grew up. So I was born in the UK because my dad was a medic and retired now, but he trained at King's College in London. I was born there, and then we moved to Newcastle where I spent a few years. So I learned English in Newcastle of all things, and so I ended up being a Geordie. And then when we were 5-6 years old, we moved back to Singapore, and so we were there for quite a few years. My parents are ethnically Chinese. I'm ethnically Chinese. My parents are Singaporean. All my grandparents are from southern China.
Right.
And then when it came to when I was 14-15 years old, I then emigrated to California, to San Francisco, where I did my high school and my undergrad. And then when I was 21 years old, I moved to Cambridge to do my PhD. So I think my identity has changed multiple times, but probably what has sealed what I consider myself is, even though I've been in the UK for the past 30 years, is probably Californian. It's not American. Yeah. American is a very thing. I think I'm Californian. I'm wearing shorts, and even sitting in my exactly sitting in my office. So I think that's it. My identity because we've moved around so much, my identity has slightly shifted. Obviously now I sound weird because my wife's English, but I think culturally, because I did my high school and I did my college, university in California, I've always considered myself Californian.
That's really interesting. So it's that mix of cultures which you've been involved with throughout, and that's what's kind of like formed your identity. So
I think so.
Yeah, ethnically Chinese, right? But born in the UK, spent time in. When you said it to me the other day, it really made me think about this little Chinese boy in Newcastle, Singaporean boy, and then going back to Singapore with this strong Geordie accent. It's just so
it's a weird thing, right? So if you were in nursery school in Newcastle in 1973, like how many 1974, how many Chinese people are going to be there? Not a lot, right?
Yeah.
And then suddenly, then I go back to Singapore and no one can understand me for the first. But clearly, I think what then happens is if you're a little 6-year-old me running around with this strong Geordie accent and no one can freaking understand you, you very quickly adapt. I mean, this is part of it, right?
Yeah.
Where you're thinking, oh my God, you're sitting there going, and your brain is very plastic, and you're thinking, why does no one understand me? Why do people look at me? Why are they laughing at me? And very, very quickly, sadly or not, you adapt very quickly, particularly when you're 6 years old.
Yeah, because children, the thing about it is children will tell you exactly, or they're unfiltered. Yeah.
Completely unfiltered.
They're unfiltered and they will say it as they see it. Right. And if you look different, But then it's how then as we grow does that change, that we start to become more, how can I put it, reserved. We learn how to not necessarily highlight so many differences, but we still are able to I don't know, it's do we hide it, and how well do we hide it? I'm not even quite sure. But when you got there and you were then in Singapore, and then you moved from Singapore to the US, it was another big move. And when you moved to, how was that for you?
So that was the biggest move for me, right? Because it's one of these things when you're 6 years old, you can barely, I don't remember changing my accent. I don't remember anything, right?
Yeah.
I just knew that I was Singapore. That's the first time I actually really remember. But the move to San Francisco, to California, which is when I was 15 years old, really, I remember every minute of it. My parents sent me across first for the first 3 months in order for me to start school at the beginning of term at the right time. And I stayed with an uncle of mine who is from San Francisco. Laissez-faire, I think I'm going to use the term for his carrying capabilities. And it was a very hugely Singapore, certainly back in the mid 80s, was Singapore in the mid 80s. It wasn't particularly, I mean, it was multicultural in a Singapore sense, which means that 75% of Singaporeans are Chinese ethnically, 20% are Malaysian, and the other few percentage are probably South Asian Indian, with a few smattering of other types of people. And so that was the kind of multiculturalism I saw, largely Chinese, Suddenly I moved to the United States. Suddenly I moved to San Francisco in the mid 80s, which was quite multicultural at the time, particularly with people that looked like me. There were obviously white people there as well. It was a huge change. And then mix into that the fact that you're a teenager, suddenly you see these foods that you've never seen before in your life. At the time when I moved, McDonald's had just been in Singapore for a year. So just to give you an idea of what I was getting myself into, right? These days of globalization, it's not that big a change. But for me, and by yourself, and you're going, what the hell is this? It was a big change for me. That to me was the biggest. This is probably why I consider myself Californian, actually, because it was such a huge change. I had so much adaptation to do. I was then thrown into high school, right, with all the high school things that high school comes about, because they're teenage with all the angst, and I was half monosyllabic because I was a teenager. It was a very interesting time. I survived, as you can see. I'm still here. Hello.
Yeah. Were you, before the move, were you excited about moving across, or did you have trepidations about going?
Oh no. I was so ready not to be at home because I was 15 years old, right? I mean, my mom hated it. My mom was in tears. Oh, my baby's going. And it was, I mean, she obviously, even though she knew she was going to join me a few months later, but there we go. That's moms for you. I was very, very excited. But, then suddenly the reality hits the fantasy, right? So suddenly I was there. It was second, third day of school. And then you're going through the process. I was different. I sounded different.
Yeah.
I had a Singaporean accent.
Yeah.
And it was such a different world, and it took me it took me a while to actually get comfortable. I was the shock to the system was actually enormous, particularly since I was 15 years old, I think.
Wow. Okay. So, because you've moved around so many times, but that transition which we're referring to here in terms of going from Singapore to the US and everything that entailed, that had a major impact on you. In terms of friendship groups, because you're leaving a set of friends from Singapore and having to make new friends now in California, how did you set about? What was it about your personality or anything? Did you feel that you could fit in? Did people, because you spoke about when you were 6 and the kids were kind of like laughing, making fun. When you got to California, how was that? In terms of, because you were going into school.
I was going into school. I was an oddity, not because of what I looked like, because there were quite a few. There were quite a few other Chinese people, because of what I sounded like.
Yeah.
And it's difficult for those of you who haven't heard a Singaporean accent. It's a very sing-songy, slightly accent. I wouldn't go as far as to call it pidgin English, but it's very sing-songy. Anyway, so where I found my community at school, shall we say, was through music. So like, I'm a musician, I like to sing, and I ended up in musical theater. You know, we have, as a lot of schools do, they kind of have a school play and a school musical every term. And so I joined it. You know, I wasn't the star or anything, but I was in a chorus. I did some singing. And actually, that is where I ended up finding my certainly my high school community were people largely that sang. That was what unified us. Because you at high school in the United States, all the way through, it's not, you still have to take all the subjects.
Yeah.
Okay. It's not like when you get to A levels where you pick only 3 or 4. You have to do all the subjects. So I did all the subjects. So we were moving classes. And so I had people who were in my class, but my community, who I went out with, who I hung out with because it was after school, we had to rehearse, were musical theater, musical people. Yeah. And so that undoubtedly formed my core of people that I mixed with. And as a result, because I was picking something like music, it meant that it was diverse. Yeah. Because obviously anyone can do music. It didn't matter what, you know, it's not like if you're an athlete, you're a different, your particular shape, your thingy. I mean, okay, you got to sing, you got to be able to be musical, but in terms of what you look like, you could look completely different. So no, I mixed with a bunch of random looking human beings, but because of our shared love of music.
Right. I'm gonna bring you back to, because I'm just thinking about when you're saying this, in the back of my mind, all I'm seeing is the kids from Fame, right? And
that's right, yeah.
Right, and I've seen the guys on the piano, and then they're dancing and all of that. That's what that's kind of
I can't dance. Okay. Incidentally, I can't dance.
Right, but I get that sense of it's part of a joyed experience. You're perfecting a technique, and the intensity of that. How did that develop the relationships and your sense of identity, belonging, that kind of like performing and practicing?
So what happened was, because we then ended up, so I did this from the very first term, right? You're looking for things, right? You're looking for something to join. You're looking for something. And I joined the musical theater pretty much in my first term. And because I could sing, okay, I don't know how good I am at, but I can sing, then that immediately meant that you had something in common with someone. It then made fitting in. And look, you might say, well, why do you want to fit in? Well, because we're teenagers, and all teenagers want to fit in. All people want to fit in, probably. Yeah. And it made my transition easier. Because now I have people with a shared interest. It meant that immediately there was something to talk about, and then from there you can then learn something else about them, right? However they looked, whatever they liked, if they were good scientists or not. And so for me, it was, I've always sung, like I was just, when I told you during our pre-chat before this, where, you know, I'm not a particularly religious person, but my parents are, and we're Catholic. And so when my parents went to church, you know, there was a little 6-year-old annoying person next to them. And so what they did was they threw me into the church choir. And so that's it. So I went to church, I sang. So I've sung all the time, but when I'm singing in a church choir, everyone looks like me, broadly speaking. Yeah. So to actually mix with people that didn't look like me, but liked the same thing. So for me, that was one of the first times. I know it sounds weird. I know it sounds weird, where I am now mixing with people that not look like me for the first time, but it's true. Okay. And so so it was a very interesting a very interesting experience to begin enjoying and working with people that didn't look like me.
And so in that idea about working with people who didn't look like you, what was formulating in your mind about them, other than the fact that you had that shared experience of music and stuff like that? What other things were influencing you, or was there anything else about them that you said, actually, I wouldn't mind knowing a little bit more about you in this sense, or you in that sense?
What was interesting So the vast majority, I'm just trying to think back now, nearly all of them were like American, meaning that they were pretty much born and raised in San Francisco, even born and raised there. And so they had different cultural norms. Even, okay, you obviously had each individual people had each individual culture. Are you Chinese? Are you black? Are you white? Are you Hispanic? Whatever, okay? And so there are cultures that are there. But overwhelmingly, the culture was one of being an American teenager in American school, which I was not.
Yeah.
And I was used to being brought up in a far more rigid society. Okay, like just as an example, okay. First, hugging people as a hello. Okay, I mean, now you go what, you have a hello, whatever you do, perfectly normal, completely alien to someone from Singapore. Okay, at my time. And so when someone introduced me, hi, this is Giles. He's just immigrated, he's a new student, and then someone come along and just suddenly give me a hug. I'm going, dude, what are you doing? Stay away, personal space. And it was just for me, it was an interesting, obviously, then you very quickly adapt and you realize, well, hang on a second, this is just a way of saying hello. You don't just shake your hands, you don't just have personal space just is relative. From that. So it was doing that. It was not only from people who didn't look like me, okay, but people who did not behave like me in the slightest. And that to me was an interesting experience.
Okay. So, and that melding, so it's also a melding of experiences in terms of the fact that you all enjoyed music. You started to, how can I put it? You were there
learning to be American, because then what then happened was they then took me to football games, like American football games. Like there's the TV show Friday Night Lights, but that's because on Friday nights in the autumn and winter in America they played football, American football. Yeah. Now I didn't freaking know what the hell was going on. I watched football, proper football, like all the rest of us, because I was from Singapore. So I went, I learned about that. I go, oh my God, what the hell is this game? I learned how to do that. So I then begin to learn about speaking the sports, supporting the local team, and all of that took me a good year or so to sort of embed myself, so that I could sort of arrive after the big game the next day and say something that maybe look like I actually watched it, right? And I actually understood what was going on. Once again, it's all part of the belonging. Yeah, and it was just you getting me thinking about this for the first time in a long time. Wayne, it's just interesting, because I haven't thought about it forever, as you might imagine.
No, the reason why is because when the first thing which you said is that you view yourself as Californian, California, and so it's what are those strong ties which was established at that age, which means that you view yourself, your identity as that, as one of your multiple identities, because you're also a scientist, and there's other things which we could add on to that as part of your identity. So it's why was that the one which was selected out of all of the many identities that you could have said? Some people could have walked in and said, I'm a musician, I'm a scientist, I'm a this, right? But why that particular one as opposed to others? Does that make sense?
No, it does. Actually, I haven't thought about that before. Why I say it, you're right. Why do I pick California? And I could pick a million other things. I can say, I think it's because of what I just described. I think this was as I was trying to fit in, and 99% of the kids that I was mixing with were from San Francisco, not even just California. They're actually from San Francisco because it was a high school, right? Yeah. And so as I was trying to fit in, and as I was trying to learn the things, and the teams I was following were from San Francisco, the foods that I was eating, were Californian and as it went. And then I went to university, and that even really nailed it down even more. So I think that's the reason why. I don't know what I would have said necessarily if I was born there, but I think because I was forced in this loosely used term, right? No one was whacking me in the head with a stick, but because I was forced to adapt quickly, okay, in the same way that you adapt very quickly when you're 15 years old to a bunch of other 15-year-olds. I think that's why. So when I left, I tried so hard to be Californian in order to make sure that I fit it in as quickly as possible. That actually, that probably left an imprint on me more than anything else. And I was singing before I went to California, and I sang after I left California.
Yeah.
Whereas I think the Californian bit was so strongly imprinted. I still support the same teams now, whenever it's so I think that's what.
Yeah. So I love that. I love that it was the intensity of the experience.
I think so.
Yeah.
I think so.
The intensity of that experience. Because not only were you good at music, but you were also good at sciences, and it led you down the route. So what was it about? Well, clearly we understand that love of science, of music. I know your dad was a medic. So was it just an innate kind of, was there encouragement pushing you to say, go into the sciences? What happened?
Probably, actually. I mean, because for a long time, till I finished my undergraduate, I wanted to be a doctor.
Right.
So
okay.
so I didn't want to be a scientist first.
Yeah.
I only wanted to be a scientist later. Like scientists. I know doctors are scientists, but I wanted to be a doctor. I mean, I think probably because my dad was a doctor, right? It's a natural thing. He encouraged me, talking about this. So was I good innately at biology? I mean, there's got to be some genes involved. My dad was obviously good at biology as well, probably. But it was something which I had to spend less effort in to be good at, which is what the definition of what we are, compared to maths, right? I mean, I was never particularly good at maths. Languages were not a forte of mine. And so whereas biology and chemistry was. And so that's probably why I ended up doing it. I had also, on top of that, I went to a good school, and it's a good school because my biology teacher, who I still know him, I haven't checked up on him recently. Thomas Murphy, and American system is different, okay, but he noted that I was good at biology because we took tests and I got full marks or what have you. And so he called me and he says, Giles, can you stay after just a couple of minutes? I just want to have a word with you. And he told me then about these things called advanced placement tests. So if you're good at a particular subject, you can do college courses, university courses, just to get some credit, so that when you go to university, you can take more advanced classes when you get there. It's called advanced placement. Yeah. And he said, look, I think you're suitable for biology advanced placement. It does mean you have to stay after school 1 hour a day, that kind of thing. Yeah. And he encouraged me. He encouraged and grew my love of biology for that. So really, I have him to thank for why I ended up choosing it as an undergraduate degree, and hence because of that, my PhD and how I ended up in my career now.
That's really interesting that it was somebody else, kind of like external to the family, even though you had your dad who was saying, yes, it's good that you could become a doctor and encouraging you and stuff. But it was someone else recognizing your potential, recognizing, the potential is what I'm going to say.
The potential. And if I asked you, can you name a teacher from your childhood, you could probably only name one or two, right? It's same for me. And I remember, so he's one of the ones I remember, Thomas Murphy. Yeah. Because he cared. He did care. Yeah. He cared. Yeah. He didn't have to come along and say, Giles, come on down and talk to me or spend the time with me after school because, but he did. So.
And as a result of that, you then have gone on and you went on to do biology as a major at university. And so how did you get from doing biology in the States to being here at Cambridge? What happened? Where's the journey going?
So when I was an undergraduate, I did molecular. Well, I went to do molecular biology. Okay, that was the degree. And then I ended up specializing at the end of my second year in genetics. Okay, because I liked it. So between in the summer, between my second and third year, so in the United States, undergraduate degrees are 4 years. Okay, so this is between my sophomore and junior year in university. Sorry. Between my junior and senior year, between the third and fourth year of university, I wanted to spend some time in a lab, like people do. What are you going to do over the summertime? And because I knew that my dad had spent time in England, and because I had a history of being in England before, and I did have another uncle there, and many uncles all over the place, I said, look, Dad, I wanted to think about going to England. And so I ended up in a lab in Cambridge, the lab I ended up doing my PhD in, as it turns out,
Right.
in a lab in Cambridge over summer, as many undergraduates in many places do. And I rented a little place. I was trying to enjoy Cambridge. It was very nice here. And at the end, and I brought all my medical school applications because I wanted to be a doctor. Okay, I passed all the medical school is a graduate degree in the United States.
Yeah.
So you have to pass exams. So I passed all the exams, the required exams. All my applications were with me, and I was going to spend the summer working in the lab in the daytime and filling out my applications at night. I got to the end of my 3 months or something in the lab, and I was debriefing with my supervisor, right? Who kindly took me in, and he asked me, as we were talking about, he says, "Do you want to do a PhD?" And I had not thought about it before until he asked. And you might think, well, that's a bit weird, but I hadn't, right? And I don't know whether or not it was sudden, but I recall this. I just said, yes, I do. And so all my medical school applications went into the bin. And so then that was the time, all the way till then, okay, I had thinking I'm going to be a doctor, I'm going to be a doctor, I'm going to be a doctor. And when suddenly I spent the summer there and that supervisor asked me the question, I changed my mind. I came, and my dad was disappointed, it has to be said. So I had to apply to get in, but I applied and I got in. And he sponsored me, that supervisor sponsored me back, and he ended up being my PhD supervisor, which is why I continued then doing molecular genetics.
It's really interesting because you've just given two examples of where people have actually spotted something within you, and they've given you an opportunity, and you've seized that opportunity, right? And it's kind of like led you to where you are now. If I'm
right, because people ask, why I do what I do, and they expect some kind of strategic plan. Okay, aside from the fact that I liked science, and I think that's fine. Some people like music, some people like science. And there was no. It was I kind of make. Decisions are sometimes made for you, and that was one of them where he asked the question, and yes, I had to make a decision, but clearly it had woken something up within me, and then I decided, yes, I wanted to do a PhD. And there was another moment like that, right? And towards the end of my PhD, so my lab supervisor was a superstar. He had labs everywhere. He ended up, let me tell you how much of a superstar he was. He won the Nobel Prize in 2002 in physiology and medicine. So he's a superstar. Wow. Not for none of my work. Okay, zero, no work. He won it with his first PhD student. I was his last PhD student because he was getting old at the time and he moved to. So I had a job waiting for me in California because he had a lab in California. And I was thinking, wouldn't it be nice to come back? I had already met my girlfriend at the time. Now my wife. It all worked out, right? And we were going to go back. But she didn't get the money that she needed. I remember this. This is I had already, it's coming close to the end of my PhD, and she was waiting for a funding decision about whether or not she got a fellowship to move back to California with me to actually work. And I remember this. We were not in the same lab. She's also a scientist. She was in a lab next door. And she wandered in. She just heard the news, and she says, "Giles, I'm really sorry. I didn't get the money." And then she just turned around and walked out. And so I sat in my lab going, shit, what? Sorry, pardon my French. I was going, God, what's it? And I decided, I said, you know what? I'm going to stay. And so I then turned down this job in California and ended up staying in Cambridge for love, for whatever the reasons. But I thought that, you know what? I'm going to make this. And once again, no strategic decision. It was news, reflection, decision, and then I moved on. And now I'm in Cambridge. I'm going, oh shoot, what am I going to do? And I need to find a job.
So now you've got this love story coming through now.
Oh yeah, it all worked out.
Right, but I like that in terms of the fact that events. A friend of mine gave me this formula, which was E plus R equals O.
Okay.
Plus R equals O. Events plus responses equals outcome. So depending on how you respond to a particular activity, an event which happens, will determine what kind of outcome you've had. So with all the things which you've been saying, there was an event which happened. Either a teacher saw that you had capability, They gave you an option. You make a response, and the outcome then almost follows on straight after that. So your girlfriend at the time comes in, tells you that I didn't get the funding. Your response was, do I leave my girlfriend, or do I go to California to a good job? Do I stay with my girlfriend and I go and find myself a job? That love was strong because you stayed with your girlfriend. became your. Do you see what I mean? And that was the outcome. Yeah. So
I hope it's the right decision. I think it's the right decision. I think I've done okay. But the point is that there was no big strategic decision, right?
Yeah.
You kind of move, and I think very often people overthink things but it's different, right? Obviously, I have now lived through it, and that's fine.
Yeah.
But I think don't overthink things when you are younger and when you have the opportunity to take choices. Make the decisions you're going to make and see, but and live with them and see where they take. Things become more difficult, obviously, once you are more in your children. Life just becomes more complex. But before life becomes complex, I always think that you may as well just take the decisions for what they are.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. I'm going to ask a couple more questions. Can you just expand on the fact that the PhD which you did, what was it about, and how has that influenced kind of like the rest of the stuff? Because I mentioned that you're a professor of molecular neuroendocrinology, right? But what is it that you do, and what is it that how has that been impactful?
So look, I'll briefly tell you what I did for my PhD. It was in the molecular genetics of the Japanese pufferfish fugu ruperpes. Now, for those of you who like expensive sushi, this is the sushi you eat, and it's super expensive because the chef has to be specially trained, and there's a toxic fish, and so you got to slice the fish with just a little bit of toxin so that it makes your lips tingle. Stupid ass thing to do. I've never eaten fugu. Anyway, so I did it. I won't bore you why we were doing it. We're using it as a model organism. But I realized that genetics of pufferfish was not going to pay my mortgage. When I was looking at the next job, I was going, okay, well, this is a very niche topic. So what I ended up doing was I was knocking on doors to try and find a job, because now we've established that I suddenly changed my mind and now I needed a job. And so I went knocking on doors. I didn't wait for any adverts or anything like that. And the second door I knocked on in the department was a guy named Steve O'Ratley, who's actually still my head of department today. Okay, so I've been with him and some guys, and he was just 6 months out from discovering the first 2 genes that, when mutated, caused severe obesity. Okay, so he needed a geneticist. Okay, and so he was right place, right time, and he hired me on the spot after he took a reference from Sydney, my PhD supervisor. And I started. He handed me my first gene to work with. We found that if you mutate, mutations cause severe obesity in kids, and then that's it. Because a little bit of success early on, and since then I've stayed within obesity. This is why. So for those of you who don't know, I work on the genetics of obesity. I have since the day I knocked on that door. In early 1998, I think it was January 1998, I knocked on Steve O'Ratley's door, and he says he worked on obesity, and now I work on obesity.
Fantastic. Because for many of the viewers, they'll probably remember you as having done TV work and done some really good programs about diet, obesity, and what food does to us. So can you expand on how that opportunity came your way, and what it was, what you liked about it? Clearly, you're quite used to standing up, singing and performing, but what was it about? Kind of like, it's slightly different when it's performing in your field of expertise, if that makes sense.
So that was another thing, which, once again, no strategy, none, zero, chance. Okay, I remember this actually. So you're right. I'm not a shy person. So obviously I have done the science, like many of you might have. I've done the science festivals. I've gone to speak at children's schools, that kind of thing. 2014, I remember this. Channel 4 were looking for an obesity genetics expert, and I ended up just as a talking head on their program for less than 10 seconds. It was just literally going, blah, 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 blah. That was it. Okay.
Mm.
But then the BBC called and says, we can do better. I says, okay. And so they did something else called What's the Right Diet for You? This was 2015.
Yeah.
And I ended up, it was a 3-part series, and I ended up all the way through the program, probably about 10 minutes, which is a lot. Okay. Which is a lot. And so at the end of that, which I enjoyed, you know, it was an interesting process. The BBC at the time had a tent at the Cheltenham Science Festival. Okay. And they called me up. They says, would I come along and do a Q&A? Okay. At their BBC tent. It's on a Saturday. They pay my ticket. They pay my way. I'm a scientist. Woo, why not? So I went along. We sat in a big tent, and it was together with the director, who you guys won't know because no one knows the directors, and the presenter. And the presenter was Chris Van Tulleken, for those of you who know Chris Van Tulleken. So anyway, but everyone wanted to know about obesity genetics. And so I did most of the talking. So I was going blah, 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 blah. Unbeknownst to me, sat in the front row, was a guy, was a senior BBC exec. And he then came up to me after and goes, oh, we got to work with you. We're going to work with you. I thought it was some media, blah, blah. But no, then a couple of weeks later, he sent a couple of producers up, and I got my first documentary. Then I got my second documentary. Then I had a book. Then I had a third. Then it took off.
Yeah.
Serendipity. It was completely by luck that this guy was sat in the front row, that he came up to talk to me. And that is why I end up doing broadcasting as a side hustle. I'm obviously still working at Cambridge. That's why I ended up doing broadcasting as a side hustle.
Wow. So again, I'm thinking about the narrative, and I'm thinking about how your life was a series. Everybody's life is a series of opportunities. Different opportunities come our way, but it's what we do with those opportunities.
It's what you do with the opportunities. Did you? Yeah. Can you look? Luck. I am never. There are too few people in life who acknowledge the role that luck plays. Am I lucky that I'm born, to a father who's a doctor? Yes. Okay, I'm not, underprivileged. I understand this, and I try and I understand this, and therefore I try and do good in life because I know that I started from a position of fortune.
Yeah.
But hopefully, when luck presents itself and an opportunity drops in your hands, then you have to take it and run with it, right? Then you have to make the most out of that luck, and I hope I have done that. I hope I have taken that opportunity that's been given to me by luck, and run with it, and then transfer the fact that, listen, I've had luck on my side. And that's it. So that's why I enjoy what I'm doing. What I enjoy speaking, to just tell the experiences, not to be truthful to where you've actually where you've actually come from.
Absolutely. There's so many questions that's just flowing through my head. I often ask the audience if they have any questions. If they have, they know, just put their hand up and I'll come to them. But you spoke about luck playing a part, but it's also courage, that when these opportunities come your way, you run with what they do, or you make the most of them. And I think from what I've heard from what you've said, right, you haven't allowed. You've run with your opportunities, and to just see where it goes. I
have. It has worked out largely. I think you do. I mean, I'd like to think, looking back in my life, would I have a more strategic view of it? I don't know. I think I think that if an opportunity falls in your lap and you can. You're right. I don't know what I was going to start to say. I'd like to think I've taken the most of my opportunity. Am I a particularly brave person? I don't think so. I'm not running out. I haven't started a startup company. I've always had job security working within, well, broadly speaking. Recently, I now have full job security. But working within academia, you had some sort of ability to stick onto it. Yeah. But look, I'm not pretending I'm super brave. I'm not a freelancer full time. I haven't started my own business. I don't, you know, and I think those are probably the brave people out there. I've had a steady job. People have paid me. So yes, I think I've made the most of my opportunities, but from a really quite a privileged position, which I acknowledge.
That's so. Have you faced any challenges, would you say? What has been your biggest challenge that you've faced in getting to where you are now?
An interesting question. I think
or is that relative? Because different people...
I think it probably is relative, right? Because I have worked within a field that always has been, relatively speaking, we all can improve, really quite diverse in all its meanings. Okay, because science, look, I'm not saying that science by any means is colorblind, but it is probably, at least out there, we care, are you a good scientist? Are you a good scientist or not? So I have had the fortuity to work within that field where that has not been a major issue for me. I've encountered racism like anyone else. This is the first time I actually really encountered it, just completely set as a segue, was when I went to supermarket here in the UK. I just got here. Okay. And I would just went to the supermarket, just a supermarket to buy anything. I remember this, and I was lining up and I was just paying for my things. And the lady at the till, with all the best will in the world, bless her soul, she looked at me and spoke at the top of her voice. I felt slightly embarrassed. "Your English is excellent," is what she said to me. And so I remember, and I stood there and I remembered all I could say was, "Thank you." And I walked out. And I was going, what the hell was that? Anyway, so I remember that. But no, there is no, I've got no big sub story to tell about that. I think my love of communicating science, I had quite a bit of pushback, because people thought that I was wasting my time. But I am, people overuse the term passionate, but I am a passionate science communicator, because I think that, look, I think what has COVID shown us, right? That we have seen some good examples of science communication and some really bad examples. Yeah. And I feel that science communication is important. Pushback there, but otherwise I have not had a difficult ride, really. I can't lie.
All right, I'm going to come to the final questions, final couple series of questions.
Yeah.
Right.
Now I'm concerned.
No. Don't be concerned. Right. I think you've alluded to kind of like one of them as we were speaking, in terms of what advice you would have given to your younger self. I think you kind of like touched on it earlier on in saying, yeah.
So because you warned me about this particular question, so I went back to thinking. I had an example. So when I dropped my son off at university, a couple of years back, for the first time in the dorms, in hostels, this is what I told him. And actually, this is what I tell myself. And I think two things. Okay, don't piss anybody else. Don't piss anyone off unnecessarily. Unnecessarily being the key operative term there. And be more of a pain in the ass to replace than to keep. So be useful in whatever it is. Be more difficult to replace than it is, however you are, than to keep. And those two things I have practiced throughout my life. I have tried not to piss people off unnecessarily, and I think I'm a useful person. So I try to be helpful, so that when push comes to shove and the money is tight and grants are low, that, oh man, if we don't have him, we got to find someone else to do what he's doing. That's what I would tell my son. I says whatever and what I have, and therefore what I tell my younger self, that's what I would tell.
Make yourself indispensable.
Make yourself indispensable, right? So that so whatever it is you're doing, do the best. Even when you're just cleaning the toilet, do the best cleaning the toilet, because then they have to find a new toilet cleaner. Whatever, all right. And so that is what I would say.
Fantastic. And the flip side to that one is, what would your younger self look at you now and say, wow?
Wow, or what would they say? Wow. I think it depends on which younger person you're talking about. Let's imagine it's California younger person.
Yeah.
15-year-old. Let's imagine the 15-year-old that still had hair, and doing it. And I would probably do the wow is when I was good at biology, thinking anything. There was just no way in hell I thought that I would have ended up being. I just know, being a professor at Cambridge. Like what? That's what? No, and I think that's and it is true, right? I mean, I like to think, I've, however, by hook or by crook, I'm still here, and I've made it, and I made it here. I think that's as a young 15-year-old in that biology class.
Yeah,
I think that's what.
That's fantastic. Giles, you have been absolutely brilliant. I've really enjoyed our conversation. It's been eye-opening. It's been a good laugh. It's been revelationary in terms of understanding what's helped to make you who you are. And we want to say a big thank you for being our guest on Belonging this week. Okay. What I'm going to say is I'm going to just let people know what's coming up next week. But if you can stay on, and if anyone wants to ask you some questions afterwards, that would be great. So let me just share my screen. So for next week, this was Giles's one. For next week, we're going to have Swapnil Jatap, and he's a research postgraduate in civil and environmental engineering, and he was voted one of 30 under 30s to watch. So come next week, he's currently in America, so we're going to have a slight switch in time. Instead of it being 12:30, it will be 3 o'clock till 4 o'clock next week, Friday. And if you've missed any of the other episodes, and then on the 19th of October, we're going to have Winston True, and he is the author of the book Rot to the Core, and it charts his wrongful arrest and his period of having to be in prison, and actually him having to clear his name and finding out quite a lot about a detective who was involved with his case. So it's going to be a really good discussion, and he's going to be telling us a little bit about himself and the story Rot at the Core. And if you have missed any of the other episodes of Belonging, then please go to our YouTube channel, which is tinyurl.com/belonging-IAO. And you can see, I think we're just over 150 guests that we've had so far. So please go and have a listen to some of the other wonderful interviews that we've had. And as I said every week, none of this would be possible if it wasn't for the fact that people are so willing to share their experiences and help us to get an insight to that sense of identity, that sense of belonging. And you know what? Without us having that sense of identity and belonging, and without knowing what other people have gone through, we can't get a true sense of who we are. So I just want to say a real big thank you to everyone. Have a good weekend, and I hope to see you again next week. So thanks very much.